SI fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano shares his discoveries on how GameScript affects running backs across fantasy football GameScript. Positive, negative, neutral. We hear these terms more and more as folks discuss the advantages and disadvantages of players under different game scenarios. To help fantasy managers use this data to help them in their upcoming drafts, I looked at how each of the four major offensive skill positions, QBs, RBs, WRs, TEs, did, based on fantasy points when their team won or lost. To spin that to the future, I also examined projected over/under totals for wins and losses for this season. Let's continue this research project with running backs. Players were required to play at least 8 games, so a player like Joe Mixon, who started just 5 games, was not included. Since the Kansas City Chiefs lost just 1 game in the regular season, I put a minimum of 10 touches in either scenario, wins or losses. Ties were not considered in this exercise. Let's find out how the information can help us for 2021 fantasy drafts. Henry had the biggest difference in points among running backs, averaging 24.8 in 11 wins but just 12 points in his 5 losses. His average in losses ranked outside of the top 20 fantasy backs, which is certainly notable. Henry also averaged nearly 7 more carries a game in wins, which isn't a surprise. The Titans have the 13th most difficult schedule based on 2020 winning percentages, so regression is likely for Henry in 2021. Jacobs played in 7 wins and 8 losses last season, so we have an almost even split to evaluate. He was far better when the Raiders were victorious, averaging an impressive 21.3 points a game. That ranked in the top 5 among backs. His average of 10.3 points in losses, however, was barely in the top 35. Also, remember that Las Vegas has the 8th hardest schedule in 2021, and Kenyon Drake is now in the mix. Davis was tremendous in the stat sheets in 5 wins last season, averaging 20 fantasy points. That was good for 5th among victorious runners. However, he wasn't nearly as good in losses, averaging 10.7 points and barely ranking in the top 30. In Atlanta, Davis seems to have a featured role lined up on a team that should score some points. Atlanta also has the 3rd easiest schedule in the league, which should benefit him. Based on what we saw from Lombardi-Lenny in the postseason, it should come as a shock to no one that he was far better in wins, 13.1 ppg, than losses, 5.5 ppg, last year. The Buccaneers also have a high over/under total and the 4th easiest slate of games, all of which make Fournette more attractive. However, keep in mind that he will share the workload with Ronald Jones and Giovanni Bernard in the Bucs' backfield. Connor was difficult to trust in fantasy land last season, but he was notably better when the Steelers were victorious. In 11 wins, where Connor was active, he averaged 13.8 points. That's a big swing from the 6.5 points he averaged in 2 losses, small sample size. With the Cardinals, Connor must contend with Chase Edmonds on a team that is projected to win around 8 games and has the 13th toughest slate of games. Fantasy football headaches. Seahawks and Bears tight ends unchecked. Kevin Durant is the best player on the planet. Verducci, Padres Tatis Jr. Possibly out for the rest of the season, leaving NL MVP race wide open. Daily cover. Sammy's Reyes and the Path never taken. Welcome to the new SI. Com. The crossover. Grading the Lakers' moves after 1 day of free agency. The crossover. The most surprising moves made in NBA free agency so far. The crossover. Will adding Kyle Lowry make the Miami Heat a contender next season? The crossover. Which teams were the biggest winners from day 1 of NBA free agency? Unchecked. Simone Biles leaves Olympics beaming. Verducci. The numbers do not back up the myth of lefty hitters liking pitches down and in. Daily cover. Jerry Colangelo discuss getting Dwayne Wade on Team USA. Verducci. Dodgers complete one of the biggest in-season trades in MLB history. The crossover reacts to the blockbuster trade which sent Russell Westbrook to the Lakers. The crossover reacts to the Warriors not making trades during draft week. The crossover. Post-draft offseason predictions. Johnson was a disappointment last season, finishing 21st in fantasy points among backs. However, he was better when the Texans lost, 16.6 ppg, than when the team won, 7.0 ppg. Over his last 3 games, all losses, Johnson had a 24.7 points per game average. The Texans will be awful, but DJ will likely share touches with Mark Ingram, Phillip Lindsay, and Rex Burkhead. He's a flex play at best. The Jaguars won just once last season, and Robinson scored 10 points in that contest. So, it's no shock that the 2020 breakout running back was far more productive in losses. In fact, he averaged 18.5 points in his 13 active games that resulted in a loss. This team should be much better in 2021, but the addition of rookie Travis Etienne could severely limit Robinson's production. He'll be tough to trust as anything but a flex starter in 2021. Kamara was a part of 4 Saints losses last season, during which time he averaged a bananas 31 fantasy points. He scored a combined 83.1 points in their first 2 losses to the Raiders and Packers, which skewed the final total. Kamara averaged over 23 points in wins, so he was gold regardless of the outcome. New Orleans will look a lot different on the offensive side this season, but Kamara remains a top 5 pick. McKissick is coming off a career season that saw him receive 110 targets and finish as the RB17. It's no surprise that he was better in losses, 14.7 ppg, due to his skills as a pass catcher. Washington should be better with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center, and the over-under total is at 9.5, tied with the Cowboys in the NFC East. With Antonio Gibson expected to see more work, McKissick could turn out to be a one-season wonder. Eckler was good regardless of the outcome, but he was almost 2 points better in Los Angeles losses. That has a lot to do with his pass-catching skills, which were on display more when the Chargers were playing from behind. In fact, his targets almost doubled in games the Bolts lost. Their schedule is middle of the pack in terms of strength, and their over-under is 9.5 for the season. In all, Eckler is a surefire first-rounder in drafts.